be at the end of the presentation. Participants can ask questions by putting their hands up or by sending queries via chat. Annotations will be offline to avoid any disturbance. Okay, now let us look at the learning outcomes, what we should be able to learn at the end of today's session. The first and the foremost important is that we'll try to learn about the different causes of upper abdominal pain. What are those different clinical conditions which can have the chief symptom as upper abdominal pain? And then the second objective would be how do you approach to these patients in terms of management plan. Remember, whenever we talk about management plan, management always includes history, physical examination, necessary investigation, and treatment. So it's a four-prong plan as far as clinical management is concerned. You have to take a detailed history, you have to do a complete physical examination, you have to do relevant necessary investigations, and then based on those investigations and history and physical examination, you decide about the appropriate treatment that is required to the patient, which may be surgical or non-surgical. Now, besides these two, let us see that what are the things to remember. These are very important points that I'm going to share with you, which are essential and they need to be remembered for the rest of your career because you will find them to be very helpful at the end of the day. The first and the foremost important is undue delay in diagnosis and treatment may have an adverse outcome. Now, this is a common sense statement that if there is an undue delay, there is certain due delay, which you will call it if you want to get a blood test done or if you want to have an absolutely necessary radiological investigation to be done, that is a due delay. But if there is an undue delay, there is a delay in getting the reports back, there is a delay in making a correct diagnosis. The longer we wait in cases of upper abdominal pain in terms of diagnosis, it may have an adverse outcome. So the message to take home from this particular point is that patients with upper abdominal pain, or for that matter, abdominal pain in general, you need to have an early diagnosis so that you can offer an appropriate treatment to the patient. Then approach to the patient in an orderly manner. Now, there is a clear-cut method written in your clinical method books, in your surgical books as to how to approach these patients. Or for that matter, any patient who has a clinical issue has come to your clinic or has come in the emergency. You just have to follow that orderly manner. Rather than going haphazardly, the methodology has been clearly outlined in your clinical methods books, and one should not sway or one should not try to reinvent the wheel when it comes to managing clinical conditions. And same goes for the upper abdominal pain. Common things occur commonly. Now, common disease is likely to occur more common than uncommon disease. There are times as smart medical students will talk about rare syndromes or rare conditions as among the top differential diagnosis, which is a wrong approach. The orderly manner would be that you think of the common conditions first. And then if the common conditions are excluded, then you think about some uncommon conditions. So this is another important point to remember, that do not try to go into uncommon conditions right at the outset. Think of more common conditions because they are more prevalent. Fourth point, you must be familiar with the anatomy and the physiology of the abdominal viscera. I always tell my medical students that if a mechanic knows the structure of the machine, it can tell you about its function. If the mechanic does not know the structure of the machine, he will not be able to discuss the function. And that is what you call the physiology. So if somebody knows the physiology of the machine, they can also talk about the pathology, that the problem lies at this particular area because the normal function of that area is like this. So under the prevailing circumstances, I'm just giving you an example, the problem lies in this part of the machine. Similarly, it happens, a similar situation is with the human body. If you want to learn with clear concept about diseases, it is important that anatomy and physiology should be very clear in your mind. So just by clearing your first professional examination does not absolves you from remembering anatomy and physiology. You will have to keep on revising it in order to understand pathology, in order to understand surgery and any other subject that you will come across till your final year and even in post-graduation. So you should be familiar with the anatomy and physiology of the abdominal viscera if you want to learn about abdominal pain. Must be familiar with different pathologies affecting abdominal viscera and their clinical presentation. Now, if what mind doesn't know, eye doesn't see. What mind doesn't know, ear doesn't hear. So you may place in a stethoscope the earpieces and you put the chest piece onto the patient's chest. Try to listen to the sounds, the breath sounds or the heart sounds, or at times the peristaltic sounds in the abdomen. But if you don't know what to listen, if you don't know, you don't have the background knowledge about the different sounds that are produced in different conditions, you will not be able to learn anything. So in order to have a more productive clinical assessment, it is important that you should know about different pathologies which affect the different abdominal viscera and their different clinical presentations, because there are certain clinical conditions which have very, quite overlapping symptoms. And if there are overlapping symptoms, then you will have to find those subtle differences between the two different conditions in order to have a correct diagnosis and to have a correct management of the patient. So once again, anatomy, physiology, and pathology has to be very well read, has to be very well understood, and the clinical presentations in order to have appropriate management. And obviously, if I jump to point one, the undue delay at times is because that we have lost control or lost track of anatomy and physiology, or are not familiar with the common pathologies or important pathologies involving the structures. So there it can be an undue delay. So an early diagnosis and early treatment will be with a physician or a surgeon who understands the anatomy, physiology, and the pathology related to the abdominal viscera. Caution with the elderly age group, which is also important to remember, because the elderly age group have limited physiological reserves. So in that particular group, one would try your utmost effort in order to have an early diagnosis so that there is less physiological stress on them for a shorter duration, and you are able to address their issue at an early stage in order to have a better outcome. Now, there is a famous dictum, if you can understand this, I'm sure some of you must have heard about it. I'll read it to you. It's common things occur commonly. Even the most uncommon presentation of a common thing is more common than uncommon thing. Or you can say that even the most uncommon presentation of a common disease is more common than uncommon disease. I'll sort of break it out, break it into small portions for you to understand. Common things occur commonly, or common diseases occur commonly. Like common diseases जो हैं वो commonly होती हैं. Even the most uncommon presentation, and there are certain common diseases जिसकी uncommon presentation होती है. It is not a routine presentation. There can be an uncommon presentation of a common disease is more common than uncommon disease. Like a common disease की uncommon presentation भी जो होती है वो rarer diseases से ज़्यादा common है. So the message to take home is that you do not go into rarer syndromes and disease trying to impress each other about your knowledge. In clinical practice, in majority of the patients, you will find common diseases. The common diseases may have an uncommon presentation, and that you also need to know with your knowledge about pathology, depending if it is surgery or medicine, if it is related to abdomen or any other area, whether it's gynae or ENT. There are certain common diseases which may have an uncommon presentation, and those uncommon presentation diseases are even more common than uncommon diseases. Now, just to revise your anatomy quickly, remember that your abdomen can be divided into 9 different portions, or in certain situations you can actually divide the abdomen into by 2 imaginary lines, one which is going through the midline across the umbilicus, and another one going across the umbilicus like this, which can divide the abdomen into right upper quadrant, left upper quadrant, right lower quadrant, and left lower quadrant. Now here it has been divided into 9 different portions, 9 different segments: the right hypochondrium, the epigastrium, the left hypochondrium, the right lumbar, the umbilical, the left lumbar, right leg. So here is what lies the upper abdomen. Now remember, the upper abdomen also includes what? It not only includes the abdominal viscera, but it also includes some of these structures which are present above the diaphragm. Remember your chest cavity, it sort of goes up and then it comes down. So a certain portion of your abdomen is actually under the ribs. And as it is under the ribs, we know that the lungs and the pleura will actually go into those crevices. So at times there are conditions which are related to lungs or relating to pleura or even relating to heart can actually present as an upper abdominal pain. So it is important that when we make a differential diagnosis of upper abdominal pain, we always keep in mind that the lung, the viscera, the diaphragm, the heart, they can also be the underlying pathological viscera which can produce upper abdominal pain. All right. Now, if you just look at some of these structures which lie in these areas, the liver, the gallbladder, the right kidney, the small intestine. In the epigastric region, you have the stomach, the liver, pancreas, duodenum, spleen, adrenal glands, left hypochondria, you have the spleen, colon, left kidney, and the pancreas. So these are the main structures that you will find in the upper abdomen. Here you can see another one, the liver, the gallbladder, the biliary system. Then you have the esophagus, you have the stomach, you have the duodenum over there, then you have the spleen, then you have the whole of the pancreas over here. These are the major structures that will be there. And if you just go above the diaphragm, although they have not drawn the lungs over here, but these bronchioles will obviously lead to the lungs. And overlying the lung, we know that there are pleura. And the heart is missing over there, but the heart also comes at times can actually present. The heart condition can actually present as an upper abdominal pain. Now let us come to the different causes of upper abdominal pain. Now this particular diagram which actually show you the different conditions which can lead to this condition. Now a right upper quadrant pain, left upper quadrant pain, left lower quadrant pain, or lower right lower quadrant pain. Now, a right upper quadrant pain, if you look at it on your screen, there is lung, which can have effusion, empyema, and pneumonia. Liver can have hepatitis, liver congestion, which can occur because of congestive cardiac failure, liver abscess, hematoma, or it can be a liver malignancy or hepatocellular carcinoma. Biliary can be cholecystitis, choledocholithiasis, cholangitis. Duodenum can have a perforated ulcer. In the epigastrium, the heart can actually produce ischemic heart condition. Myocardial infarction can actually present with upper abdominal pain. Pericardial effusion. Esophagus can have esophagitis, rupture of the esophagus. Then the stomach and the duodenum, which can be dyspeptic symptoms, gastritis, ulcer, obstruction, volvulus. Pancreas can have like pancreatitis, pseudocyst, pancreatic malignancies, and then obviously aortic aneurysm can also produce upper abdominal pain. The left upper quadrant has got lung again, just like on the right side. You have effusion, empyema, and pneumonia. Heart can have ischemia. Spleen is there on the left side, which can have splenic abscesses or at times traumatic splenic rupture. Then stomach can have a perforated ulcer over there. All right. So these are different. Then if you want to include in right hypochondrium, there is also kidney, which can actually have pyelonephritis, infarction, abscesses, ureter. The upper part of the ureter also comes in the upper abdomen. They can be stone, which can lead to hydronephrosis. On the left side, again, there is kidney with the similar conditions, stone, hydronephrosis, pyelonephritis. Spleen is there, can produce splenic abscess rupture or an enlarged spleen, especially in patients with beta thalassemia, can have massive splenomegaly and can cause a degree of upper abdominal pain. Now, these are some of the common conditions that can actually occur in patients, in conditions in which the upper abdominal pain may be a chief manifestation of those conditions. Now, just to sorry, slide is stuck. Sorry about that. Can you please hold on? host.
Yes, Dr. Zahid.
यार वो स्लाइड चेंज नहीं हो रही है.
एरो की से कीजिएगा, एरो की से नेक्स्ट कीजिएगा.
एरो से
जी, जो कीबोर्ड पे एरो की होती है उससे कीजिएगा.
हाँ, कीबोर्ड के एरो से करो. अब हुआ है, ठीक है. थैंक यू वेरी मच. हो गया. Alright. Sorry for the interruption. Now let us sort of tabulate the common causes once again. It is cholecystitis secondary to polylithiasis. It can be acid peptic disease. It can be pancreatitis. It can be myocardial ischemia or myocardial infarction or renal lithiasis. Now, if you look at these 5 conditions, obviously there are other common conditions as well, but in clinical practice for upper abdominal pain, these are the common conditions that you have to keep in mind. Your approach should be in a way that you are able to cover other conditions as well. Since there is a long list of these clinical conditions which can cause upper abdominal pain, and the time restriction would not allow us to pick up every condition and look at their clinical presentation, I'll just take 2 examples, 2 common examples, one of the most common examples or conditions which can lead to upper abdominal pain. One is cholecystitis secondary to polylithiasis and acid peptic disease. We'll just see how to approach them, how to sort of go about diagnosing them, and what are the clinical hallmarks of these conditions which can help you in making a diagnosis. Now, management of upper abdominal pain, I just mentioned earlier, management obviously includes history, it includes physical examination, it includes investigations which may be laboratory investigations, radiological investigations, and may also include endoscopy. The treatment ultimately will be surgical and non-surgical. Now, as medical students, I would urge you to remember this slide. This management plan is applicable to any clinical condition, whether it is medical or surgical or gynecological or any condition. You have to take a detailed history. You have to do a complete physical examination. You have to, at times, do necessary investigations. And then finally, you have made a diagnosis. Then you can subject that patient to an appropriate treatment, which may be either surgical or non-surgical. Now, among the common conditions, common symptoms, like we mentioned, talking about upper abdominal pain, we know the different questions that we need to ask from the patient. We need to know about the site of pain, the onset, the time and the duration of pain, nature and character of pain, severity, radiation, aggravating or relieving factors, progression of pain, a referral, whether it's a referred pain or not, how does the pain end of pain, and what does the patient's perception of cause of pain. These are the points which you will find in your clinical method books. I have just sort of mentioned it over here just to re-emphasize that you need to memorize. You need to memorize these points, and you need to keep on applying on your patients. Though under the prevailing circumstances, you are not having an interaction with the patients, but soon you will have, inshallah. So when the time comes, you need to memorize these points, and you have to keep on applying on the patients so that you remember them. Once you remember them, you will not be able to, you don't have to sort of keep on revising it because now it's gone into your long-term memory. But pain being one of the most common problems that you will come across in majority of the clinical specialities, it is important that these points are very well remembered. So for upper abdominal pain, these questions need to be put up to the patient. Now, associated factors with upper abdominal pain can be vomiting, constipation, diarrhea, hematochezia, which is fresh blood in the stools, hematemesis, which is blood in the vomitus, jaundice or hematuria. These are the common associated factors. There may be other associated factors as well, like sweating and all, which may be seen in patients with myocardial infarction. But these are the common associated symptoms with upper abdominal pain. Now, on physical examination of a patient with upper abdominal pain, you need to look at the general physical appearance. It's just a repetition of what is written in your clinical method books. I'm not swaying from what is written in your clinical method books because that has been established. The wheel has been invented, so I'm not going to reinvent the wheel. And like I mentioned earlier, that you should approach these patients in an orderly manner. Now, this is the orderly manner that is mentioned in your clinical method books, in your surgical books, and I'm just following that, and you need to follow it because this is a common universal language or universal approach to patients management. Now, for physical examination, you need to look at the general physical appearance, the facial expressions, and ability to converse. Remember, if somebody is in severe upper abdominal pain or is in severe distress, will not be able to converse with you properly. The facial expressions will actually tell that this patient is in anxiety, is in agony because of pain, and you need to act accordingly. So general physical appearance is exceedingly important, and a good clinician is always able to pick the first, at first sight of the patient, looking at the facial expression, looking at the way the patient walks, looking at the way the patient is conversing with you, that you come to know that where is the problem. Is the problem of serious nature, or the problem can be managed according to the available circumstances. Now look at the vital signs. The vital signs have to be looked at. Blood pressure, pulse, temperature, respiratory rate, all these 4 points are a gateway to the overall physical status of the patient. The blood pressure can be normal, it can be high, it can be low, patient can be tachycardic, patient may be febrile. If you check the temperature, you may find the patient to be tachypneic with increased respiratory rate. So these vital signs will also give you a further gateway after looking at the general physical appearance. Now in the abdominal examination and inspection, you need to look for any bruises, swelling, inflammation, look at the breathing pattern. In patients who have abdominal pain because of peritonitis, these patients have a shallow breathing pattern and it's more of a thoracoabdominal. They try to limit the movement of the abdomen because with every movement of the abdomen, they have pain. So you have to with a lot of ability, you have to develop that ability and skill to pick up that change in the abdomen, in the breathing pattern, where the patient is trying to limit the movement of the abdomen because they know that if they breathe in deeply and make the abdomen move, they will experience pain. So you have to look for these subtle signs when you're inspecting the abdomen. Palpation will look for tenderness, look for presence of any enlarged viscera like liver, spleen, or kidney, or any other palpable mass on examination. Percussion can be dull to resonant, depending on whether there is ascites or whether there is a presence of gases, a lot of gases in the abdomen. Now, auscultation, you should look for the gut sounds, whether the gut sounds are present or absent, or the gut sounds are exaggerated, which are at times in patients with intestinal obstruction. Now remember, abdominal examination is not complete without pelvic examination, so it is essential that you should do a digital rectal examination or PR examination, in females the PV pervaginal examination. Now as far as the investigations are concerned, this is a list of investigations. You can go through it. As you go into your 4th year and final year, you will be more familiar with these investigations. There is complete blood count, blood urea nitrogen, creatinine, electrolytes. You need to check on to the patient's blood sugar levels, serum amylase and lipase. Some of you would be knowing that amylase and lipase is high in patients with pancreatitis. Liver function tests have to be looked at, cardiac enzymes, trophi, urine analysis. All these investigations are essentially required. In majority of the patients, some of the investigations will be more specifically required in certain situations, but these are the common investigations that would be needed in majority of the patients, maybe except with the exception of cardiac enzyme that you may not consider in a younger age group, but rest of the investigations are usually recommended in patients with upper abdominal pain. Now, as far as radiology is concerned, you may ask for a plain X-ray abdomen, a chest X-ray may be required, an ECG may be required if the person considers that this could be of cardiac origin. An ultrasound abdomen is a non-invasive investigation, and it is a very important and a useful tool since its invention, and it can give you a lot of information about solid viscera. A CT scan may further sort of give you details about rest of the abdominal viscera and can actually help you in making an early and accurate diagnosis. Then at times where CT scan is contraindicated, one may consider MRI. Then there are times when endoscopy is required, but sometimes upper GI, sometimes even lower GI endoscopy is required in order to determine the cause of upper abdominal pain. And then at times angiography, a mesenteric angiography is required to determine as to the possible cause of upper abdominal pain. Now the treatment, I'll just give you a sort of a broad outline, a very broad outline to management of upper abdominal pain. This broad outline can be applied to any patient who comes with abdominal pain, not necessarily with upper abdominal pain, but since we have this morning's topic as upper abdominal pain, so I need to just emphasize on it. First, you need to look at the airway, breathing and circulation, that is the ABC. Then you need to have an IV access with a large bore cannula. You need to start with oxygen therapy. If the patient is low on oxygen, you need to give a good analgesia to the patient. If the patient is in pain, it is important as a human that you need to give some analgesia to alleviate the pain. So once you do that, you will find a more comfortable patient, a patient who can actually converse with you better. In certain situations, you may require antibiotics to be started at an early stage. Then you need to pass in a nasogastric tube. Foley's catheterization may be required. Central venous access at times are required in order to monitor the central venous pressure. Then arterial lines at times may be required, not necessarily in all the patients, but in some patients an art line or arterial line is required for appropriate monitoring of the patient. Then you obviously require continuous monitoring. When you talk about continuous monitoring, you're talking about the blood pressure, pulse, the temperature, the respiratory rate, the urine output, the how much amount of IV fluids that you're giving to the patients, the general well-being of the patients. All these things need to be monitored to see that how well you are resuscitating this patient and how much you are optimizing the patient. The final decision greatly depends on your investigations that you have done, whether the ultimate diagnosis is a surgical condition or a non-surgical condition. So these broad outlines or broad steps in the treatment is more or less applied in most of the patients, if not all of the patients. But the final decision or the final treatment will greatly depend on the investigations that you've already done, the laboratory investigations and the appropriate radiological investigations. Now, as I mentioned, that I'm just going to take two clinical conditions quickly just to give you more idea about how to go about learning. It is important that the rest of the clinical conditions that I have mentioned, you need to go back to your surgical textbooks and you need to take out those conditions, read about them and apply them exactly in the same pattern that I have put them under these headings like polycystitis. Now, polycystitis is known to be more common in females. Okay, there is a 4F or 5F, which is called, it's usually seen in the 4th decade of life. The 4Fs or the 5Fs are the fat, fertile, female, 40 and fair. So this particular condition is common in fat females who are fertile in the 40s, who are relatively fat, obviously females, and at times the word fair is added to it, like fair colored, because the West has put it up, but not necessarily only common in fair females, fair colored females. The fat, fertile, female, 40 are the 4 common Fs which are applied on patients who have polycystitis. Now, the chief presentation is right upper quadrant pain or epigastric pain, and this pain is it radiates to the back. It is colicky, a dull ache, and can be a constant pain. It is aggravated by fatty meal. It is relieved by analgesia. All right. So these are the common characters of the pain that patients would have with polycystitis. Now, it is associated with dyspepsia, alteration in bowel frequency, flatulence, and vomiting. Now, these are the associated symptoms with pain. So the right upper quadrant pain or the epigastric pain is the location of the pain. It at times radiates to the back, colicky, dull ache. It can be constant. It is aggravated by fatty meals. So patients would usually say कि जनाब हम शादी का खाना खाने गए थे और शादी के खाने के बाद फिर ये दर्द शुरू हो गया, or whatever whenever they take fatty meal they would actually have these symptoms of varying degree. It can be of mild or nature pain or it can be severe in intensity. and it is relieved by analgesia, and then there are the associated symptoms. Now, on physical examination, you need to look at the general physical appearance of the patient, as I mentioned. Sometimes this patient would be stable, and sometimes they will be in a lot of pain because of the inflammation going on. You need to look at the vitals on these patients. These patients can at times be tachycardic, and if there is acute bacterial infection with cholecystitis, then these patients can also be febrile. The general physical examination, if there have been a lot of vomiting and these patients have not been able to take orals, you will find these patients to be dehydrated as well. On abdominal examination, you will find tenderness in the right hypochondrium, which is called the Murphy's sign, when you will ask the patient to breathe out, breathe in, and you will actually press your hand in the right hypochondric region. The patient will actually wince, will actually stop in the middle of the breath that the person is taking in. That is called the Murphy's sign. Now, among the laboratory investigations, you need to check on the complete blood count. In complete blood count in patients with cholecystitis, you may find a rise in the TLC count, the total leukocyte count, and in the differential leukocyte count, you will find a neutrophilia. You need to check on the liver function test, because at times patients with cholecystitis, they can be deranged liver functions because of the inflammation. Then you need to check on with the ultrasound. The ultrasound is usually diagnostic in an experienced hand for cholecystitis. A CT scan at times may be required if the ultrasound is inconclusive, or if there is a suspicion that the gallbladder has ruptured, or any other condition that the ultrasonographer is not comfortable only by doing an ultrasound, will actually recommend a CT scan abdomen. A CT scan abdomen can actually give you a more holistic anatomical picture of the abdomen. And if we are looking at gallbladder, it can tell you about its thickness. It can tell you whether it has ruptured or not. It can even tell you about whether this is beyond cholecystitis. This could be malignancy if you see infiltration into the liver, or some other changes that would suggest that it's not simply cholecystitis. It can be something else. But in patients with cholecystitis, a good CT scan will be able to tell you about the thickness of the gallbladder, the inflammation that is over there, and you are making your diagnosis accurate. Now, as far as the treatment is concerned, you need to resuscitate. Similarly, as I mentioned in the broad outlines, you need to give them intravenous fluid. If they are dehydrated, you need to start with empirical antibiotics and need to give analgesia. The definitive treatment, since we know that it's a surgical condition, at some stage, you need to offer these patients cholecystectomy. In current day and age, we use laparoscopic assisted cholecystectomy. The cholecystectomy can be planned at an early stage, or at times one may delay cholecystectomy for 6 weeks or 4 weeks to let the inflammation settle. It's a question of individual practices, but both practices essentially are followed across the world. Now, the second condition that I picked up is the acid peptic disease. These are the two most common. Cholecystitis and acid peptic disease are the most common conditions that we come across, where there is upper abdominal pain. There is a slight male preponderance. Remember, cholecystitis was more common in females. There are slight male preponderance in acid peptic disease, though females also have their share of acid peptic disease. Then it is more common in middle age. It is again an epigastric pain which radiates to the back. It's more of a gnawing pain, and it is intermittent. So remember, the cholecystitis pain also produces pain in the right upper quadrant and in the epigastrium. Similarly goes with the acid peptic disease. That pain also radiates to the back. Cholecystitis, the acid peptic disease pain also radiates to the back. So there are quite similarities between the two. It is aggravated or relieved by food intake. Now, there is a famous teaching that patients who have gastric ulcer, they will be reluctant to eat because they know that if they eat, they will have pain. And there is a duodenal ulcer. Patients with duodenal ulcer, they have a tendency to eat more because eating tends to relieve the pain. So if there is a patient who comes in, even a female patient who have got gallstones, and says, whenever I take meal, when I'm having pain, the pain gets relieved. So in that situation, you don't have to focus on the gallstones. You have to exclude the possibility of duodenal ulcer, because this is a classical picture of patients with duodenal ulcer, that they will complain that whenever they eat food, whenever they're having pain, the pain gets relieved. So Common sense says the patients with duodenal ulcer can be on the overweight side and the patients with gastric ulcer may be underweight. Now, there can be alteration of weight loss with acid peptic disease. For duodenal ulcer, as I mentioned, they tend to eat more because the pain gets relieved by taking food. So they will be on the overweight side. And for the gastric ulcers, the patients who are reluctant to eat because they know that if they eat, they can have some degree of pain. So they tend to be on the underweight side. They can be, along with acid peptic disease, they can be hematochezia, which is presence of fresh blood in the stool, or they can be melanotic stools, like black tarry stools that is again suggestive of bleeding from these ulcers. Now, these bleeding ulcers can be in the stomach, they can also be in the duodenum. Now, on physical examination, in patients who have uncomplicated acid peptic disease, you may find just the epigastric tenderness. In fact, if you ask the patient to point where the pain is, they will actually they're able to point it with one finger. And that is also called a pointing sign. And that pointing will be in the epigastric region. So you may find epigastric tenderness in these patients. Among the investigations, the gold standard to diagnose acid peptic disease is upper GI endoscopy. And that will tell you about whether A, there is presence of any acid peptic disease. B, it will tell you about its location, whether it's in the stomach or in the duodenum. It will also tell you about the severity of the disease. Then it can also sort of take samples to exclude or include the possibility of Helicobacter infection. It has got a multi-pronged benefit. So upper GI endoscopy in patients who have symptoms of acid peptic disease will help you in making an